This is chapter 4, part 4, the last part of the chapter. And here we're going to focus on kind of what falls outside of the plasma membrane, and then what kind of connections do we see between cells. So first we're going to start with plant cells. So this is a main difference between plant and animal cells. Outside of the plasma membrane, plant cells have what we call an extracellular matrix, and their extracellular matrix is their cell wall. Okay, so plants will have a cell wall where animal cells do not. The major molecule found in the cell wall is cellulose, which remember is a structural polysaccharide. We talked about that back in chapter 3. And so if I look at my plant cell here, you should recognize most of these organelles, right? The nucleus, the nucleolus, we've got chromatin in there. We've got the endoplasmic reticulum, smooth and rough. Here's our Golgi, our mitochondria, our chloroplasts. Those are only found in plants. Peroxisomes, right? Other plastids, that central vacuole. And then you can see some elements of the cytoskeleton in here as well. And then we have a plasma membrane, and it's really pushed up nice and tight against this green material here, which is the cell wall. Okay, so again, the extracellular matrix, so what comes outside of that plasma membrane in plant cells is going to be the cell wall. And again, it's made mostly of cellulose. Here is a nice light micrograph. You may actually remember seeing this in the lab when you made the onion temporary preparation. This is what it probably looked like. And so you can see the cell's nuclei, and then you can see the nice cell wall here, a rigid structure that gives shape, support, protection to that plant cell. The cell wall also allows for tissue formation and for intercellular communication, so communication between two neighboring cells. And that's what we're going to look at next. So in plants, again, with their cell wall, there's going to be a connection between neighboring cells in the same tissue. And so those connections, they get a special name. They're called plasmodesmata. Okay, plasmodesmata. And on this figure right here, what I'm showing you is here's one plant cell here. Here's its nice large central vacuole. We've got the cell wall in green, and in this yellowish color is just the cytoplasm. Here's its neighbor. So this is a separate cell over here, same structures, right? And you can see that there is this channel. There is this direct intercellular connection. So these two cells are connected by the plasmodesmata. Okay, so it's a channel that's going to extend from one cell to the next. It's made of proteins. And again, it's going to connect the two neighboring cells' cytoplasms. So it's a direct connection. Why do they have these? Well, it's going to allow materials to be passed from one cell to the next without having to leave the cell, cross through the cell wall, go to the neighboring cell, cross through the cell wall, and then through the cell membrane. It makes this movement of materials much easier. So what types of things get moved? Well, water, nutrients, hormones, signaling molecules, okay? And so that's going to really facilitate communication during growth and response to environmental stimuli. Okay, so that's it for plants. So we're going to move on. One second. We're going to move on to animal cells, and I skipped a few slides here. Let me just back up. Okay, here we go. So animal cells also have an extracellular matrix, but it's not a cell wall. Instead, this extracellular matrix, so this should look familiar, right? This is the plasma membrane. It's a phospholipid bilayer. Here are some proteins here and here and here. This is the inside of the cell. These are elements of the cytoskeleton here, and this would be the cytoplasm. This is outside the cell. And so anything outside of the cell, so from the top of this membrane here, these phospholipid polar head groups, anything outside of them is considered to be the extracellular matrix. So extracellular means outside of the cell. What do we find? Well, we do find proteins. So you can see these collagen fibers. Okay, those are proteins. Fibronectin is another type of protein. And we also find carbohydrates. And so all of these branched structures here that you see, those are going to be carbohydrates. And then we also find some polysaccharides, which are carbohydrates. Okay. And so there is this network of proteins and carbohydrates. Why are they there? So this structure is going to provide structural integrity to tissues and organs. It also plays an essential role in cell signaling, which is something that unfortunately we don't have time in the semester to talk about, but just be aware of that. It also provides for cell adhesion, so it allows cells to stick together or to stick to surfaces. It also allows for cellular migration. So there are some cells in your body that move around, and the extracellular matrix is going to assist in that movement. Okay? And so I'm going to now talk about some connections between cells. Okay, so there's 3 different types that we will discuss. And the first are tight junctions. Okay, so tight junctions are going to be, again, associations between 2 neighboring cells. And so in this figure here, you can see we have 1, 2, 3 cells, right? They are rather kind of box-shaped, but they don't have a cell wall, right? We're talking about animals, just a plasma membrane. This is the nucleus here, this big large dot, cytoplasm here. And you can see that we have this little box around the membranes here and around the membranes here. And so if I took one of these little boxes and blew it up, this is what I would see. So I have one cell membrane here, and then the second cell membrane is here. So we're just showing the membranes. And connecting them, you can see these. These are strands of what we call transmembrane proteins. So they're proteins that go all the way through the membrane, and then they're connected to and go all the way through the neighboring cell's membrane. Okay? You can see how tight they are. So again, tight junction, look at this. The 2 membranes are right next to each other. When I think of tight junctions, I think of 2 neighboring cell membranes that have been stitched together. So we've literally sewed them together. This is going to create a watertight seal. Nothing's getting through here. Okay, so a watertight seal between 2 adjacent, 2 neighboring animal cells. This is going to prevent materials from leaking through this layer or prevent them from getting between the cells. Where do we find tight junctions? We find them between epithelial cells that line internal organs or internal cavities. Okay, and so you can think of the lining of your, that is an epithelial barrier. And so again, those cells are going to be tightly stitched together. The lining of your stomach, same idea. There's going to be some tight junctions in there. Think about that. So you ingest food and liquid, and with that food and liquid, sure, there's nutrients, but there's also going to be microorganisms and other stuff that you don't want inside of your body. It's okay in your digestive tract because your cells here with their tight junctions are going to prevent anything nasty from crossing through that epithelial barrier and getting into your underlying tissue. So again, really important, really for protection. Okay, the second type of connection are called desmosomes. Okay, and so desmosomes, again, only found in animal cells, not plants. I like to think of desmosomes as snaps between cells. They anchor cells together, but they're not watertight. Okay, so again, same idea. We've got cells here. We've got 1, 2, 3 of them. And if I'm looking down here in this region and I were to blow that up, this is what a desmosome looks like. And so there's a lot of proteins in here. We've got 2 neighboring cells, 2 neighboring adjacent cell membranes, and we've got proteins. And these proteins are called transmembrane proteins. Specifically, they're called cadherins. these proteins are going to extend from one cell to the next. Okay, and so it's like we've snapped the cell membrane together. Notice how they're not, really tightly together. There is space in here. These are important, again, because they anchor cells together. They prevent the cells from just coming right apart. And so tissues that stretch, so for example, your skin, your heart, your muscles, right? They stretch because they expand and they contract. And so you don't want them to expand and just not come back together, right? So these snaps allow them to expand and then go back together, stretch and then go back together. Okay, so it keeps two neighboring cells next to each other by snapping them together. So we've got tight junctions, which are watertight seals, right? Really for protection, protecting that underlying tissue. We have desmosomes that are like snaps that keep tissues that stretch, keep the cells together. And then lastly, we've got gap junctions. This is our last slide here and our last type of cellular connection that we'll talk about. Again, these are in animals. And parts of the extracellular matrix are going to be involved here, as well as the membranes and transmembrane proteins. And so gap junctions, I want you to think communication. These are really the equivalent of plasmodesmata that we just saw in plants. But again, these are only found in animals. And so what do they look like? So let's, again, same picture, two neighboring cells. We're going to look right here at these two membranes. And so if I blew that up, these would be the neighboring cell membranes. There's the space in between, right? This would be the cytoplasm of one cell, the cytoplasm of the other cell. And what we find are these transmembrane proteins, these proteins that go all the way from one cell's cytoplasm all the way through to the other. Okay? Specifically, the protein is called connexin. I don't really need you to know the specific names. I need you to know what they do. So again, it's a gap junction, so proteins that extend all the way through from one cell cytoplasm to the next, and they provide a channel. So again, just like plasmodesmata, this allows materials to be passed from one cell to the next without having to leave the cell and get back in. What types of things? Same thing, water, nutrients, hormones, signaling molecules. Okay, again, it allows these two neighboring cells to work together, to communicate with each other, okay, to respond to environmental stimuli, all of those things. And so that concludes chapter 4.